So I want to ask what is probably an obvious question. How many people here think that the United States Congress is working correctly for the American public? Please raise your hand. How many of you think that's an absurd question and the answer is really obvious? We have a problem, and the problem is that Congress is genuinely broken and not working for the American people. At this point, we have moved from democracy of, by, and for the people to democracy of, bought, and paid for by large corporations and the 1%. That is an enormous problem. We have got to take our country back, and we have to take our country back one congressional district at a time. We have to take our country back one Senate seat at a time. We're going to have to work incredibly hard to overcome the power that enormous amounts of money are doing to damage the democracy that all of us believe in. I didn't set out to be a politician. I started out as a software developer, and occasionally it still shows. And I got into politics because in 2003, there were two things that happened in very quick succession which changed my perspective. The first was a very good thing. My son Henry was born, and I did what I think all new parents do. I say, how do I give this child the kind of life I want him to have? But when Henry was about 2 months old, my brother Jason marched into Iraq with the initial invading force, and I realized that we had to change the direction of the country, or there was no chance I could give Henry the kind of life I wanted him to have, which is why I'm running for Congress.
Thank you.
So the term for the special election is likely to be this December. December of this year is when the debt ceiling fight is going to happen again. And there's every reason to believe, based on what the Republicans have said and done to date, that Social Security and Medicare will be on the table again. We are going to need all hands on deck to ensure that there is no way for them to cut the Social Security and Medicare benefits that people have paid for and earned. I filed for the special election because we need someone who's actually going to go fight to the mat on those issues and make sure that we stop having the American middle class and working people subsidizing multimillionaires and billionaires, which is what the Republicans have been doing and what they will try to do again in December. The average contribution size to my campaign is less than $40. I don't have a single donor who has maxed out. Most Americans want something fairly straightforward from the healthcare system. They want to know that they can go see their doctor when they need to and not have to worry about the insurance companies getting in the way or saying they're not going to pay for it. They want to know they're not going to be bankrupted by their care when they need it. They want to know that the insurance companies aren't going to kick them off and that their loved ones are going to be able to get the care that they need. And the Affordable Care Act was a step in the right direction. I was actually the person who organized the fight around the public option with the Congressional Progressive Caucus and progressive groups. And one of the things that I think that we need to do, because the question was what would we do if the Affordable Care Act is overthrown, is that means that we need to take to the American public the idea that they should have at least one option the insurance companies can't control that allows them to get the health care they need. So I support making it possible for every American who wants to buy into a Medicare-like system in which they choose their doctors, their health care is paid for, they can't get kicked off, there are no caps, and even if they've had breast cancer, they can get the care they need. You know the Charlie Brown comic strip where Charlie goes to kick the football and it keeps getting pulled away? The president's relationship with congressional Republicans has been a lot like that. Mitch McConnell made it clear that he would stop at nothing. His #1 priority was ensuring that President Obama failed. And President Obama continuing to go back to the Republicans and pretending like they were going to operate in good faith was his single biggest mistake. So I come from a military family. My dad was in the Air Force when I was growing up. My husband is an Army vet. My brothers are Army vets. I agree that we need to take care of our veterans. I will say I feel no compunction to use your tax dollars to make the shareholders of Halliburton and Blackwater wealthy. That has got to stop. And what we Is an enormous ramp up in defense spending, well beyond what the Defense Department believes is necessary to protect our country. We do need to cut that spending. I would start by ending the war in Afghanistan, which would save us $100 billion a year, which is about $230 million for this congressional district alone each year. Think of what we can do with $230 million, how many teachers we can hire, how much we can do. So yes, I favor defense spending cuts, and to do it where we ask the Department of Defense to figure out what it's going to take to keep us safe, and we don't spend enormous amounts of money for pork beyond that. So a big piece of the problem we have in our discussion of our relationship with the rest of the world is there tends to be this false choice where we say we're going to be isolationist and we're not going to do anything at all, or we're going to send in our military, cowboy-like often, think George Bush here. And those are not the only options. They're rarely the best options. It is in our vital national interest for us to come up with a way for the international community to intervene when we see significant humanitarian issues, as we do in Syria. It does need to be the international community, and we need to strengthen those institutions. We have the ability to apply economic power. We have the ability to apply diplomatic power. Maybe it makes sense for us to do airstrikes. I actually agree with Senator Hobbs. I would not send in ground troops. That has been an enormous disaster for us. But I do think that we need to start rethinking how we approach the rest of the world so that we can build the kind of international community that can guarantee fundamental human rights for every person on the planet. Yes, we need another stimulus. A couple of the things that were incredibly effective in the 2009 stimulus, there was investment in roads in places like Bothell, where they added another lane to I-5, which is a huge quality of life issue for a lot of people in this district. That kind of investment makes a lot of sense. We have schools throughout this state where you've got kids going to class in portables that are way past their expected lifespan. We should be building the school buildings that we need and refurbishing schools. But the other kind of program that we need represents a real opportunity. There were some pilot programs in which utility companies were given funding for investing in upgrading heating systems and weatherproofing houses and things. That has an enormous return on investment for us in the long term, and not only stimulates the economy and creates jobs, but helps people's day-to-day pocketbooks and deals with climate change in a way that is incredibly constructive and urgent for us. New cash crop for Skagit County, 4. I think that we should use best available science instead of politics to class it appropriately, and that hasn't been done. Against, the evidence is charter schools don't work. I get knocked down, but I get up again. I think everyone up here and most of you in the audience want the same thing. We want a country that works for the American people again. We want to send someone to DC who's going to fight for normal people, who's going to be willing to stand up and say, no, it's not okay for working people to subsidize the very, very wealthy, the Mitt Romneys of the world. No, it's not okay to send our troops to war with no plan for bringing them home. And while we have stylistic differences in terms of how we would approach that problem, I don't actually think there are fundamental differences in what problem we're trying to solve. I would be proud. I didn't get into the race to run against any of the 4 people up here. I got into the race because I would be incredibly honored to represent you all, and because we have to make sure that no one here ever has to say Congressman Koster. Corporations are absolutely not people and do not deserve the constitutional protections that actual people should have. There are a couple of versions of the constitutional amendment available. I like the one introduced in the U.S. Senate by Senator Sanders and in the U.S. House by Congressman Ted Deutsch. Very straightforward, establishes that corporations are not people. I think we need campaign finance reform on top of that. If we want democracy as government of, by, and for the people, then we need to get to a system of people-powered politics. In the short term, I've been putting my money where my mouth is and running an incredibly people-powered campaign. We've had thousands and thousands and thousands of small donors. In fact, we had more than 1,000 people contribute today alone to my campaign for Congress. That's people power. So H-1B visas, as the program was a good idea, making it possible to bring in experts. Then we can create American jobs around. I was at Microsoft when we brought in a natural language expert that they then hired 50 Americans to create a team for. Unfortunately, a lot of the ways they're used are not what was intended, where they're bringing folks in to undercut American workers, and that's incredibly counterproductive. I guess I would start by saying that any company that's actively doing layoffs should get an allocation of 0 H-1B visas for the year. I actually don't generally support guest worker programs because I believe all people are created equal and we shouldn't be creating a two-tiered society. If we invite people here to work, they should have a clear path where if they're working hard, they're contributing to our society, they're learning English, they have a way to become citizens. And the problem with guest worker programs is they exclude people from that opportunity to become citizens. So I support comprehensive immigration reform done in a way that respects the fundamental equality of every human on the planet. I actually detasseled corn when I was a teenager, which is not something I would recommend doing for fun for any of you. I have done that kind of agricultural work. I know how brutal the conditions are that people work under, and if there are any jobs that demonstrate a willingness to work hard enough that we ought to give people a path to full participation in our society, those certainly count. There are 2 members of Congress that I have been fascinated by and certainly looked up to, who are very different stylistically, who are Nancy Pelosi and Steny Hoyer. Both of them have mastered the art of getting things done in Congress by doing the groundwork and organizing that it takes to actually move progressive priorities. And when they controlled together the House of Representatives in 2009 and 2010, they passed an enormous amount of terrific legislation that then died in the Senate. Filibuster reform is a whole other topic. But they are our best examples of how to actually move things through the Congress. So as the only person up here who is simultaneously a tech geek and lives in a rural area, I'm feeling pretty good about this district. I live just outside of Carnation, and you know, it's funny, I have spent the last several months doing an enormous number of very small voter contact house parties in the district. There are a couple of the hosts of some of those events in the audience right now. And it's been great getting out and talking to people and letting them tell me what their questions and concerns are, letting them ask their questions of me and having me answer them. I think the correct term, by the way, is from Carnation to Point Roberts being the far corner of the district, where I've done an event. We just finalized today invitations to a series of events in Linden and Monroe and Arlington and Lake Stevens, and I mean, it's I think that the key really is listening to people and giving them an opportunity to meet you face to face. Events like this are fantastic, and I want to thank all of the volunteers who organized it, because this is real democracy. It's actually kind of fun being in a race where there are a bunch of other folks who I'm confident will be good votes on most of the things we all care about and fight for. But it isn't going to be enough to be a good vote in this Congress. I think that you all have seen time after time, as we've sent people to DC, and over and over and over again, they've caved, and they've folded, and they've failed. We have got to stop doing that. We have got to send people to Washington, D.C. who are willing to stand up to the bullies when John Boehner says he's going to cut Social Security and Medicare, who are willing to fight for our values and take it to the mat, who don't think that this is some game or some exercise, but who understand what's at stake and are willing to fight for you. I'm willing to do that, and I think voters in the district understand that, which is why every poll that's ever been done in this district shows not only that I'm ahead in the Democratic primary, but I have the best chance of beating leaving John Koster and going to fight for you in Washington, D.C.